All right, I am now pleased to introduce the moderator of our next panel, Julian Boggs, the State Policy Director of ESA and the newest member of the ESA team and the policy team. Julian's already making his mark. Hey, Julian.
Hello, Jason. Thank you very much. I have had the opportunity to connect with a number of you since I joined ESA last August. And while I think, hopefully you agree, this is a pretty good virtual format, I very much look forward to the time when we can all be together in person. It's certainly been an interesting time to start a new job, but it couldn't be a more exciting time for the energy storage industry. We are, I think, as you said yesterday morning, indeed entering the charging 20s and the decade of energy storage. Gives me great pleasure to bring our first panel today, looking at state targets and pathways for energy storage deployment. The thing that I truly love about working on state policies is that states, as they say, are the laboratories of democracy, and they're the laboratories of energy policy, certainly. Each state is charting its own path on energy storage and trying out new ideas, borrowing the best ideas from one another, ultimately creating the cutting edge of energy storage policy. And it's not going to look the same in each state. Each state has its own landscape, its own energy goals, its own resources, its own individual policy priorities. That's certainly true for each of the states that panelists today represent in Arizona, Colorado, Michigan, and New Jersey. And each of these states has its own goals for energy storage and the broader energy transition and its own strategy to get there. And we'll discuss that, how storage fits into each broader strategy, whether or not they're trying to hit a specific storage target or trying to utilize storage on the pathway towards meeting broader energy goals, trying to compensate or incent energy storage, or working energy storage through utility planning and integrated resource plans. So I am pleased to welcome our panelists today. We have from the Arizona Corporation Commission, Chairwoman Leah Marquez Peterson, from the Michigan Public Service Commission, Chairman Dan Scripps, and from Colorado, Senator Chris Hansen. And Senator Chris Hansen actually joined us from the Senate floor, where he is taking votes on the budget at this moment. And so he will be able to, he will be able to join us momentarily. So
yes, I'm sorry to cut in, Jillian. Hey everyone, this is how policy is made. It's made at the last minute with members of state legislatures running around because votes are scheduled at very interesting times, and members of regulatory commissions have to be in and out of various dockets quickly. So for us, this is of course something that we try to make sure that we're able to accommodate in ensuring that everyone who can participate in this event certainly can. At the same time, I do think that also for those of you who are watching here, one of the things that is really critical in what Julian's describing before we move to this panel is that the many different folks that you're going to be hearing from on this are folks that oftentimes have been working on storage for many years. And so while some of these names may not be terribly familiar to a lot of you, I think it's really important, and what part of what we try to do at the ESA's Energy Storage Policy Forum is bring the folks who have been working on these matters for a very long time to be able to recognize the work that they are doing and bring them into these conversations. So one of the things that we're going to do now, if it's all right with you all, is recognizing that our Senator Chris Hansen is still running behind. We're going to make sure that we can move forward with this panel, recognizing that we have some challenges with his timing. And hopefully we'll see if we're going to be able to bring him in. But if not, I think we're going to just have to move on with our state regulators. So without further ado, I think it's time for us to move forward, Julian.
Indeed. Thank you so much. So I'm going to start with you, Chairman Scripps. The Michigan Public Service Commission is certainly in the midst of a lot. A colleague recently told me that if you want to do distribution planning reform, you really have to want to do it, because it's such a big task. You're doing utility planning reform, grid modernization through your My Power Grid initiative. Now you have an executive order from Governor Whitmer to include zero carbon planning in a net zero carbon by 2050 goal. You've talked about needing to keep the focus of My Power Grid on action and implementation, ultimately positioning Michigan to benefit from the ongoing energy transition. What do you see as the role of energy storage in achieving all of these commission goals?
Yeah, thanks, Julian, and thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity. And as we were getting ready to speak, I was reflecting on how little I miss being in the legislature. For all the chaos that sometimes comes with the regulatory process, it doesn't always look like that. So, but it's great to be here. You know, with the many ways that storage can contribute, it's obviously important that that we sort of reflect the full value. But it's also a challenge because the way that storage shows up in so many different ways. It can be both the generator and load, can be utility scale, distribution scale, utility owned, user owned, third party owned, can be used to address capacity issues or to avoid distribution or transmission upgrades. And it offers a host of resilience and ancillary benefits as well. You know, but those benefits and the fact that they are so widely dispersed also make it a challenge because sometimes our regulatory proceedings, you know, remain siloed. And so a comprehensive approach is needed. And that's what we're trying to get to in Michigan. So we're trying to do this in a number of ways. First, in our integrated resource planning process that was established in 2016, you know, our statutory bar and test for approval of utility IRPs is whether they represent the most reasonable and prudent means of addressing energy and capacity needs 5, 10, and 15 years into the future. That's a high bar, and it should be a high bar. But it also means that you really need to sort of fully consider all available resources, including storage. And we've been pretty direct in our orders in terms of what we expect in terms of the consideration of storage in utility integrated resource plans going forward. We also in Michigan require distribution plans for the 3 largest utilities, the second round of which will be filed with us this summer. And storage can offer benefits here too, whether in non-wires alternatives or in helping to better and more cost effectively accommodate other DERs such as rooftop solar. And I also note that the sort of growth of distributed energy resources is increasing the overlap between resource and distribution planning. And I expect that that will only continue and in fact increase, including with the sort of growth of storage. And then we, as you mentioned, have the My Power Grid initiative. This is a multi-year effort to ensure that Michigan maximizes the benefits of the energy transition. As part of that, in our second tranche of work groups, we have launched a new work group on the new technologies and business models, which includes a significant focus on energy storage. And in that, we're looking at different ownership models, scale, and the sort of range of benefits and challenges of accommodating those benefits within our regulatory process so that at the end of it, we can reform our regulatory process to be better able to fully consider it. And as you mentioned, all of this is made more urgent by Governor Whitmer's My Healthy Climate Plan, announced last September, the members of which were actually announced just yesterday. But looking at how do we get to economy-wide net zero by 2050, including an interim goal of 28% reductions by 2025. And you know, it's a good group of people from across the state with a diversity of backgrounds, and I'm excited to dive in with them, you know, later this month as we start this process. And I fully expect that storage will be part of that. But I guess I'd close sort of this part by saying, you know, for all the changes that are happening, and they're so exciting, Michigan, I think, is well placed to think about these for a couple of reasons. First of all, we've dealt with storage for a long time. We have one of the largest batteries on the planet with the Ludington pump storage facility, 2,100 megawatts on the shores of Lake Michigan. And that gives us a sense of the balancing role and how And originally built to basically offtake from nuclear plants that needed to run all the time. Now increasingly sort of well placed to deal with intermittent resources. So that's one. The second is our long heritage and history with the automotive industry, and obviously the overlap with storage there in terms of transportation. And I think we're beginning to learn and apply lessons between those things in ways that even 10 years ago I'm not sure that we would have expected. And then finally, I'm a fill-in for this because of our newest commissioner, Catherine Paratic, who just went through the Senate's advice and consent process earlier today. But she comes to the commission with nearly a decade of experience in energy storage project development, and I am so excited to have her on board and to learn from her and to use her expertise as we craft our regulatory framework for how to better accommodate storage as we go forward.
Thank you, Chairman Scripps. And I believe Commissioner Paratic was not able to join us because the legislature, yet again. but thank you so much for that overview. And I'm really glad you brought up pumped storage, because so many times we think of energy storage as new and a new technology that hasn't been tried and true. And there are, of course, incredibly new innovative battery technologies and other types of storage coming online all the time, but we've had pumped hydro for quite a long time and know how it works and know how to use it. And that's an integral part of the plan. I want to come back to more of these topics, of course, in our broader discussion. But now we do have Senator Chris Hansen.
Yes.
And so.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry about the drop in connection on our side.
No problem. Certainly, we understand the mitigating circumstances. So you're the senator from Colorado. Colorado has certainly been an early leader in clean energy. I particularly think that I was a college student and going to the polls for the very first time in my life when I was able to vote for Colorado's first RPS in 2004. And so maybe it's just a little bit in my mind that Colorado is an early leader, but certainly Xcel, I believe, was the first major utility to commit to zero carbon. And of course, that's now mainstream amongst a number of utilities. And as Colorado is hitting higher and higher in levels of renewable energy, there's been a lot of talk, and I know you've been an advocate for the need for a regional market. What's the next stage of Colorado's progress on clean energy, and what role does energy storage play in that? And can you do it alone, or is a regional approach needed?
Yeah, really great questions, Julian. I think this is going to be a very active year for energy legislation in Colorado. I'm planning to bring legislation forward both on storage policy, build on our, I think, strong foundation, but continue to move that part of our progress forward. And then the interplay with regional markets, also planning to bring some legislation forward on that piece to move Colorado more quickly into an RTO. I have always kind of envisioned the complementary relationship between more flexible storage resources and needing to have the RTO on the kind of systemic change from the top down. And those two things work really well together to allow for very high penetration, low cost renewables into the system. And we need both in Colorado because we're about ready to add gigawatts of new wind and solar with the next round of ERPs that we're starting really right now. And so, storage policy, one of the things that we need is property tax treatment so that it looks the same as the property tax treatment we have for other renewable energy equipment. So that's something we're going to move forward this session. And I think that will really spur hundreds of megawatts of new grid scale storage, as well as some of the smaller scale projects. I did hear you mention kind of pumped hydro. Colorado's got a couple really nice facilities, take advantage of our topography, but we need to build on that and have more at the level of, especially around the new solar facilities where batteries integrate really nicely with that duty cycle. And you take advantage, of course, of the inverters that you have on site. So that's what we're trying to do in Colorado, more quickly, move assertively. And I think storage is a really important piece of our decarbonization strategy here.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Senator. You teased a little bit storage legislation coming up. I don't know if you can say a little bit, not to put you on the spot too much, but if you could say a little bit more about what we might expect.
Yeah, so my first bill of the session actually will be released publicly in about 2 weeks when we reconvene the Colorado legislature just after President's Day. And the bill is really designed to make it clear that the property tax treatment for storage equipment will be the same as what we give for other renewable energy equipment. And I think that is really going to spur rapid investment in storage, both grid scale and distribution scale, even some behind the meter. And I think that is one of the keys to unlocking what I think will be hundreds of new megawatts of proposed projects. So it's a big opportunity for Colorado, and we need it, I think, urgently to integrate lots of additional wind and solar into the grid.
Yeah, absolutely. We just had Senator McClellan from Virginia here, and of course ESA has been supporting legislation in Virginia to do that, and we're seeing it in a number of states that as there were a number of tax exemptions and tax reforms passed for renewable energy, the teens were the decade of renewable energy. Now we have the charging 20s, the decade of storage, and we need to make sure that the tax exemptions and the tax regimes that were put in place for renewable energy, when it makes sense, fit for storage as well. So the inclusion of storage in all these policies, whether or not we're talking about tax policy or, as Chairman Scripps was talking about in utility planning and so many of the other initiatives with My Power Grid, making sure that storage has its own place right there next to all of the other technologies that we have. So let me actually turn it over to Chairwoman Marquez Peterson of the Arizona Corporation Commission to maybe dig in on a little bit more of the specifics here. So I had noticed in your opening speech as chairwoman, and congratulations on your recent election, that you had made a call for progressive goals met with conservative policies. And of course, one of the storage related items that you've been advocating over the last several months particularly are is a compensation tariff that I think what you've proposed and how you structure it, compensating storage for all of its attributes, would really be an innovative policy in Arizona. Is that the kind of approach that you mean when you say achieving progressive goals with conservative policies, or how do you think about your approach to policy making in Arizona?
No, and thank you, Julian, for the invitation to participate today and to serve with this esteemed panel. I do think that this innovative tariff is one that kind of promotes free market principles, and we hope really helps with economic development and recruiting of business to Arizona. It's my understanding that it's one of the first tariffs of its kind in the nation. And for those that haven't heard of it, it is one in which we directed our largest investor-owned utility, Arizona Public Service Company, to develop a tariff that would allow for the aggregation of distributed storage. The focus here is really on third-party aggregators, not the utility company, and to be able to compensate them for the value they provide the grid. It's technology agnostic, which is interesting. So the focus is not on a specific device being used, but rather on the characteristics of the devices and the value that each brings. So it really does promote a free market approach to the deployment of distributed assets, and hopefully signals to companies across the industry what our interest and value in Arizona that would be. This would include smart thermostats, connected water heaters, connected pool pumps, Energy Star appliances, home energy monitoring devices, batteries, and everything else we can't think of yet, right? All this new innovation that's coming down the pipeline. Our expectation is that these aggregators would be compensated based on different characteristics, and that would include not only energy, but capacity and demand reduction, demand response, frequency control, load shifting, time value. There's a lot of different components we're looking at. And we're really looking at this point, since it's kind of the first of its kind, to determine the value of this and rely on the experts to help us as regulators get this right. Looking forward to a robust and engaging process around this tariff. We adopted this late 2020, so about November. So we're in the process now asking APS to work with our stakeholders, and we've got a docket going. And for those that might be listening in on this call or this Zoom right now, the first filing deadline is April 1st, but we're really encouraging folks to engage and to participate in the process. And they can certainly reach out to my office to get plugged in if they'd like.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, and really excited about that tariff. I think you're right. Certainly, both all the values that you're looking to compensate for, to have it really be a compensation, and then, as you said, being a complete technology neutral. So, including energy storage, and then also thinking about smart thermostats and water heaters as energy storage for those load shifting and time shifting values. Let me turn it over now quickly, and we'll come back to some of these topics, but I want to turn it over to President Joseph Fiordaliso of the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. President Fiordaliso, New Jersey is I think, the state here that has the statutory commitment to energy storage of 2,000 megawatts by 2030. What do you see as New Jersey's path to meeting that target? And particularly, this was part of the Clean Energy Act that set aggressive goals for New Jersey in offshore wind, in solar, in electric vehicles, in energy efficiency. You're trying to do a lot there at BPU, and how does storage fit into all of that work?
Great, thank you, Julian. And first of all, I want to apologize to my colleagues on the panel. I was having a little technical difficulty. But I think we're all straightened out now. Plus the fact we're trying to get over the fact that we just had 2 feet of snow. And I thought I was maybe in Michigan or Colorado, but I'm in New Jersey. So we're not used to 2 feet of snow. So it's good to be with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. And we are, as you indicate, developing our program to meet Governor Murphy's ambitious storage goals and ambitious renewable goals. We're looking at all resources, including but not limited to storage coupled with renewable generation, standalone behind the meter storage, storage on the transmission and distribution system, and programs where we can leverage the expertise of our electric distribution companies. The Board of Public Utilities, in addition to our regulatory responsibilities, is also the Clean Energy Office for the state of New Jersey. So we have a dual role here, and one that keeps us on our toes a little bit. The board recognizes the importance of energy storage to New Jersey's clean energy future. We're committed to achieving our energy storage goals and are developing a plan to meet long-term goal of 2,000 megawatts by 2030. That's in addition to 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. That's in addition to 100% clean energy and 80% carbon-free by 2050. And that's in addition to our newly initiated energy efficiency program here in the state in cooperation with our utilities. In the current environment, which has not helped a lot, as we all can attest to, we're still primarily working remotely in New Jersey. We are prioritizing COVID-19 response measures that are aimed at protecting the health and safety of New Jersey residents and ensuring that utility service for our struggling fellow citizens is not disconnected. As a matter of fact, our moratorium continues through March, and we're looking at possibly extending that. So we're focused on the clean energy sectors that will bring immediate economic benefits to the state during the crisis. Economic benefits through a new innovative economy. And we all know that utilities are a great way to infuse an economy through infrastructure enhancements, grid enhancements, and renewable, creating new kinds of jobs, job training. The offshore wind, New Jersey is positioned so well on the East Coast to be the supply chain for offshore wind on the East Coast. Unlike many of my colleagues in other states, the only place we get the wind sufficient enough is offshore. There really is no place in the state of New Jersey on land to get that sufficient amount of wind to generate energy, like a Colorado or an Iowa or something of that sort. The cost impact to ratepayers, of course, is always a primary concern, especially in these difficult economic times. And it will be a key factor and one that will be considered very, very carefully. And that's why we're prudent in every step that we take, moving toward the goal of 100% clean energy. We're committed to establishing a clean energy innovation economy. In New Jersey, we see energy storage as central to creating good, well-paying jobs, and in making sure that historically overburdened communities have equitable access to those jobs. Within the Board of Public Utilities, we just created an Office of Clean Energy Equity, whose sole purpose is to ensure the fact that every citizen in the state of New Jersey has the opportunity to participate in the clean energy revolution. Every business, every contractor, every vendor can play on a level playing field in securing business. It's so extremely important. So clean energy, storage, opens up a totally new revolution, really, to all of us. And I'm so optimistic, as Chairman Scripps indicated, with the new administration and the idea that maybe we finally have a partner. And because, as you said, Julian, the states are the laboratory for democracy, but they've also been the laboratory for innovation as far as clean energy has been concerned. And maybe now we can join together with the federal government in pursuing a much needed new environment as far as clean energy is concerned. Because I submit to you that we have a moral obligation to future generations to do everything that we can to mitigate climate change.
Thank you so much, President Fiordaliso. I think particularly your comments about the pandemic and the ways in which all the commissions and policymakers and states have had to respond to the pandemic, I think has raised resiliency as an even more salient issue than it was before. Chairwoman Marcus Peterson, I was talking to one of my friends in Phoenix in August, and I did not believe him when he told me how many days he had over 100 degrees. And I know certainly resilience with the heat wave that you had this summer, and in all your states, precipitation and impacts on the Great Lakes and Michigan, et cetera, resilience has been a big issue. How are you thinking about resilience as particularly as utility investments? As President Fiordaliso noted, and how should we pay for those resiliency investments, noting that this is a time where I think a lot of folks are understandably wary about new costs on utilities, and that's an open question to whoever wants to bite first.
Well, like everything else, the ratepayer ultimately is going to pay, and that's why I think it's so important for us to be prudent in our approach and move it. We all love, I guess, I believe, I would anyway, let me say that, to have 100% clean energy today. But in order to get there, we still have to use fossil fuels. In order to get there, we still have to use or utilize nuclear power. We need those bridges to get us to our goal. And in utilizing those bridges, whether it's coal or oil or nukes or whatever, or natural gas, we can utilize them as the bridge, but we can also utilize them as hopefully preventing rate shock to the ratepayer if we move prudently and carefully through the mirage of things that we have to move prudently and carefully through. And I'm sure, I don't mean to speak for my colleagues here on the panel, but none of us thought when we got on these commissions we'd be dealing with issues like this. You know, we would be dealing with, you know, you walk in the room and throw on the switch and the light comes on. That's great. Now what? And here we are. And I love to use the word revolution because I think we really are in a revolution. The whole energy industry is being turned upside down. So we have to be careful, we have to be prudent, and move along as slowly as we can, but as quickly as we can to meet our goals, so that we don't have rate shock for the ratepayers. You and I are ratepayers. We're going to pay for it too. So let's be careful. And I know we all face environmental groups within our respective states. And in many cases, what we do is never enough. But I think they also understand, or I would like to think they do, that we just can't overburden the ratepayer. So let's move.
Yeah, that's certainly top of mind consideration. Thanks so much for President Fiordaliso. Commissioner, excuse me, Chairwoman Marquez Peterson, you look like you're about to jump in there.
I wanted to add, I completely agree with President Fiordaliso's comments. I mean, the priority, especially now during the pandemic when so many families are struggling and we've seen so many businesses close across the nation, is affordability first and foremost. So how do we achieve 100% clean energy in our various states while also prioritizing affordability? You layer onto that the pandemic and how it's changed us, you know, working from home, Zooming like this into conferences. And then you layer on in Arizona, we actually had more than 50 days over 110 degrees, believe it or not. So we've had extreme heat, and we've seen our neighbor in California have rolling blackouts and have their own energy crisis. So all of that's playing into the direction we take, the response we've had from our utilities. I know our two largest utilities in Arizona, APS and then Tucson Electric Power, in both of their IRPs, they've made commitments to storage in their own regard. We are still talking about energy storage as part of our energy rules, and we can talk more about that, but it's been exciting to see as innovation grows, as there's more deployment of storage, that both of the utility companies have taken a pretty dramatic step in support of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe I saw in APS's IRP, they're looking at potentially 10 gigawatts of storage by 2035. So we certainly entered the big leagues when you think of scale. I want to ask one more question of the group, and also in a bit open it up to audience questions. So if folks in the audience have questions, please put those in the chat, and we can try to get to as many of them as we can. But let me ask, we were talking with Senator Hansen, who had to jump back into some budget votes a minute ago, just about the need to look at policies that were enacted for solar and wind and other advanced energy technologies over the last decade. Well, how do we go back and look at that for energy storage? And what can we learn about from the experience, lessons good or bad, from the experience of the ramp up of wind and solar? What can we learn from that we applied to, can we apply to energy storage? Chairman Scripps, if I could start with you on that one, because I know you've thought, you know, particularly as you're taking this whole holistic approach to all of your energy needs, I thought you might have a sense on lessons learned on clean energy and how we can apply that to storage.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most interesting pieces in this is really around rate design. And if you thought the challenges around net metering for solar were difficult, I think they, in some ways, are even more difficult when it gets to storage or solar plus storage, in part because of your ability to, in Michigan, we moved away from a net metering framework under the 2016 laws and now have a distributed generation tariff. And what we use is an inflow outflow tariff to understand sort of the, what you're purchasing from the grid and then what you're sending back. But storage allows customers to really sort of address and in some ways sort of like shape the loads and the timing of the loads that they're putting on and taking off in ways that probably present some pretty significant challenges to even advanced rate design that sort of goes beyond net metering. I think the flip side of looking at that, and I think probably the better way of looking at that is that can also be a grid benefit. And so if we can send the right price signals, if we can send the right regulatory or put in place the right regulatory instruments, then we can encourage customers to act in ways that are not only in their best interest, but in the best interest of the grid as a whole as well. And I think as you continue to deploy AMI in connection with storage and then distributed generation resources, the sum of those parts is in some ways, or the whole is greater than the sum of those individual parts in terms of how to address sort of grid scale challenges using distributed energy resources with storage and then the smart infrastructure underpinning it as the way that it all connects. But I want to add one more thing before it, and it's just to the conversation that we just had. And that is, I think one of the ways that we as regulators need to address this is we are always addressing infrastructure costs, and prudence and the prudence review is at the very heart of what we do. And so one of the reasons, for example, that in Michigan we are beginning to require, without a statutory basis, distribution plans is to get greater transparency into utility thinking about where they're going to spend on their distribution systems in the next 5 years. And at the heart of that is looking for alternatives to those proposals. And I think storage is a great way of thinking about that in a way that can actually help to address some of the inherent investments that are being planned in ways that are ultimately to the benefit of ratepayers. And that's, so I think it could be pricey, but I also think that when you start thinking about it in our core role of evaluating the prudence of planned utility investments, greater transparency and greater consideration of alternatives, including storage, can help us navigate that in a way that's ultimately advantageous to ratepayers.
Thanks so much. I couldn't agree more. I did want to ask about the federal investments. I think a couple of you noted that there's going to be different, and we already in December we already had a major energy bill, and we'll likely see more federal action and federal investment on infrastructure, on energy. How do you see federal investments impacting your plans for state policy, if at all? And what do you see as the biggest opportunities for federal and state partnerships over the next several years?
I mean, I don't mind weighing in first. I know that in Arizona, we are certainly looking to provide feedback to the Biden administration about the impact of, federal plans and how that would impact Arizona in particular. Studying his proposals, looking at whether there would be congressional support. I think it'd be interesting to explore federal incentives for energy storage to help with more rapid advancement, deployment of energy storage. So we're continuing in study phase, but certainly have discussed communication with the federal administration so that we're sure that each state, I mean, we're so different here, Michigan, Colorado, New Jersey, how that's going to impact each of us perhaps a little differently. I want to make sure that they're hearing directly from us.
And I think too, the new Secretary of Energy is certainly going to be, Chairman, you're familiar with her, is going to be, I think, an ally to all of us. And I think that's so vitally important. It has been a struggle, I think, and I don't want to be dramatic, but it has been a struggle for states to continue to move toward a clean energy policy with minimal federal input. And when I talk about federal input, I think in certain areas, there has to be a national policy as to exactly where we want to go as a nation relative to renewable energy. And I'm not sure we've ever had that, frankly. And I'm old enough, I hate to admit it, to remember the gas shortages of the early 70s. And back then they're talking about, oh, we got to come up with an energy policy. Well, here we are 50 years later. Do we have one? We may have 50 different energy policies from the states, but do we have one national energy policy? And I think that's maybe what we're going to see here. With the resources to help back that policy up, which is going to encourage and assist states as we move forward. So I'm really optimistic, and I'm also optimistic about the complexion of the new FERC, because I think the new FERC is going to be looking at situations a little bit differently than what I've considered, and I don't mean to create controversy, but I'm from New Jersey. We always create controversy. The FERC was dysfunctional. I mean, let's face it, over the past number of years, but dysfunctional, and has not taken into consideration, did not take into consideration state rights, the policies of states, and so on. I expect, and I hope that's going to change.
And if I could just jump in on that.
Absolutely. Chairman Scripps,
I had the opportunity to serve in the legislature for the last 2 years of the time that Jennifer Granholm was governor. And it was during the time that ARRA was in place and a lot of money was moving out through the Department of Energy around energy related. And I will say there is no better person in terms of understanding how DOE in particular around any additional stimulus dollars can be used to accelerate the transition. And I'll say, particularly when it comes to batteries, we got a lot of money in Michigan in 2009 and 2010 to jumpstart our battery industry, often tied with the automotive sector. But I can almost guarantee that Jennifer Granholm as DOE secretary is going to be cognizant of storage and has an understanding of the full benefits of storage and is in the perfect position to continue the industry's growth. And I'll only add that, isn't it great that we've got Kelly Speaks Bachman as EERE undersecretary, because, to have somebody, it not only speaks to sort of how we think differently about storage, but also about efficiency and renewables and how to put them all together in a way that's advantageous. And I think she's a game changer in that role. I know I'm playing to the home crowd here, but I think she's a game changer in that role. And we're just so lucky to have her there.
Great.
Obviously couldn't agree more, Chairman Scripps. And maybe she'll have to rename that Office of Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, but certainly energy storage critical priority from DOE. I do want to be sure to get some more of the audience questions, and we have about 6 minutes left. But getting a few questions around energy storage and fossil fuels. And I think there had been an assumption a number of years ago, maybe 3-5 years ago, some folks have that now, that energy, there was needed a bridge fuel between coal dominance and a high renewables grid in the future. And that now we're seeing in a number of jurisdictions, utilities switching straight from coal to renewables and plus storage and renewables plus storage. How do you all as regulators looking at your the utilities, the energy mix and the utilities need to maintain reliability, which was I think the thought between the need for a bridge fuel, how do you see that shifting now that we have the era of energy storage in which so many, if not all of the attributes of traditional bridge fossil fuel might be replaced by energy storage?
Our largest utility, Public Service Electric and Gas, has just committed to working toward green energy generation, 100% clean energy generation. and which is quite an interesting move by a company like that, and so on. And I see more of that happening. We also, if I may just twist that a little bit, Julian, with your permission, we also have to make sure our grid is prepared. And here we get back into the infrastructure aspect to interconnect all of this clean energy that we're producing. And in New Jersey, we have to make sure, because these the offshore wind is going to be 15 miles off the coast in the Atlantic Ocean. And the transmission of that and the ability to on ground to receive that energy, all of this infrastructure, it's going to create a lot of jobs and could create a lot of investment in New Jersey. But it has to be ready to do that. And that's my primary concern. And that's what we constantly are promoting with our utilities. That infrastructure has to be ready to accept the clean energy. And that's one of the things that, you know, they ask what keeps you up at night. I'm lying. It doesn't keep me up at night, but I am concerned about it. As a matter of fact, when I'm tired, nothing keeps me up at night. But at any rate, but that's one of the things I'm concerned about. Is our infrastructure going to be ready to accept all of this? And I know that's a little off the topic of your question, so I apologize.
Well, that's hopefully the role of energy storage. I do want to let some of our other commissioners get, because you've got PSE&G, we've got Consumers Energy, APS, utilities in each of your states have committed to 100% clean energy. So Chairman Scripps, I didn't know if you wanted to take that real quick.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the things is that we need to do a better job of defining the attributes that we want to see and then open it up and let the market come up with the best solutions. And I think if you do that, increasingly we're seeing that storage, sometimes surprisingly, is able to offer, you know, whatever it is. It's, you know, ramping, peaking, whatever the attribute is, but define the attributes, not sort of guess the technology. And I'd say that's one of the biggest lessons that I took away from the clean, you know, the short-lived Clean Power Plan, is that the act of planning itself and starting to think about futures that maybe we hadn't been thinking about, we found opportunities that I don't think we thought were possible before the planning started, and finding ways to then operationalize some of those changes in ways that, you know, looking back, seemed relatively easy. And I think if we can do that going forward, you know, push utilities, push grid operators to think beyond the status quo and do their planning. And it's one of the reasons that I'm so keen on at least making sure that whether it's distribution planning or resource planning, storage is at least considered. Because oftentimes if you force the consideration, you come up with solutions that maybe you wouldn't have thought possible on the front end.
Thanks. I was going to say that not having a technology approach and defining the goals and attributes sounds like your music, Chairwoman Marquez Peterson. So please go ahead.
That's right. As you may be aware, in Arizona, we are moving forward with our energy rules, and it is based on 100% clean energy and zero carbon emissions. So a zero carbon or a carbon emission based approach, I think, is exactly what Chairman Scripps was speaking to, the recent debate we've had in Arizona. This is an opportunity to really lead with the lowest cost option, again, be technology agnostic. And I think that's likely going to lead to an increased use of storage paired with renewables as the costs are driven down and we see more deployment and acceptance of storage throughout the state and throughout the nation. So I think that's something that we certainly support.
Well, great note to end on. That's all the time we have for today. And I just want to thank all of our panelists so much for your time. And back to you, Jason.
Thank you, Julian. And thank you, President Fiordaliso, Chair Marquez Peterson, Chair Scripps, and Senator Hansen for taking time out of your schedules to join us today. I know it can be very hard sometimes when you have a lot of pressing official business, so we really do appreciate it. And as I stated yesterday, we have a number of ESA member companies supporting the policy forum with their sponsorship. So I want to continue extending a sincere thank you to some of our sponsors, including McCarthy Building Companies, Mortenson, National Grid, Powen Energy, PPL Corporation, the New York Power Authority, and RWE Renewables. Thank you so much. Oh, and NextEra Energy, my apologies. I appreciate all of you for assisting us with making sure we have the resources we need in order to make events like this happen. So now we'll take a brief break until 2:30 p.m. when PJM's CEO and President Manu Astana joins us with his remarks. I encourage you all to join us in the lounge during this break to connect with other participants. Thank you.